The radar screen lit up with 3 enemy contacts closing fast at 25,000 feet. Captain Maya Blackwood banked her F-16 hard left, G-forces crushing her into the seat as she prepared for the fight of her life. Behind her, 2 squadron mates were already going down in flames, and the same instructor who'd spent months telling her she didn't belong was now screaming into his radio for backup. In the next 60 seconds, Maya would do something that would shatter every assumption about what a female fighter pilot could accomplish in aerial combat. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But this story doesn't begin in the sky over hostile territory. It starts 6 months earlier at Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina, where the morning sun beat down mercilessly on the tarmac as Maya Blackwood walked toward the hangar that housed the most elite fighter pilot training program in the United States Air Force. The weapons school program was where the top 1% came to become the best of the best. Only 12 pilots were selected each cycle from thousands of applicants across the entire Air Force. Maya had earned her spot through exceptional performance scores, flawless simulation records, and recommendations from 3 different squadron commanders. But as she approached the briefing room carrying her helmet bag and flight suit, she could already feel the weight of 23 pairs of eyes measuring her up and finding her lacking. Maya had grown up on Air Force bases, the daughter of Lieutenant Colonel James Blackwood, a legendary F-15 pilot who'd flown combat missions over Iraq and Afghanistan before his fighter was shot down during a close air support mission when Maya was 15. She'd found his old flight logs in the attic years later, filled with tactical notes and observations written in his precise handwriting. One entry had stayed with her: "Flying isn't about proving you're fearless. It's about being afraid and flying anyway, because someone on the ground is counting on you to come through." Those words had carried her through 4 years at the Air Force Academy, through undergraduate pilot training where she'd graduated second in her class, and through 2 years flying F-16s with the 20th Fighter Wing. But here, walking into the briefing room at Shaw, Maya felt the familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach that came with being the only woman in a room full of men who'd already decided she didn't belong. Colonel Brett Iron Kavanaugh stood at the front of the room, an imposing figure with steel gray hair and 3 combat tours etched into the lines around his eyes. He'd been an ace pilot in his younger days, with 5 confirmed air-to-air kills and a reputation for being the hardest instructor in the program. As Maya took a seat in the back row, Kavanaugh's gaze lingered on her just long enough to make his opinion clear. "Gentlemen," Kavanaugh began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never doubted his place in the cockpit, "welcome to the most demanding 6 months of your flying careers. The weapons school program exists for one reason: to create mission commanders who can lead in combat when everything goes wrong. We don't have room for passengers, we don't have time for politics, and we sure as hell don't have patience for anyone who can't handle the pressure." His eyes found Maya again. "Some of you might think your previous accomplishments guarantee success here. They don't. Some of you might believe that lowered standards or social experiments have earned you a place in this program. They haven't. The only thing that matters in aerial combat is results, and the enemy doesn't care about your feelings or your demographics when they're trying to shoot you down." The message was crystal clear, and Maya felt every head in the room turn slightly in her direction. She kept her expression neutral, her spine straight, and her hands steady on her notebook. She'd heard variations of this speech before, in different rooms, from different instructors. The implication was always the same: she was a diversity hire, a token, a social experiment that would fail when the pressure mounted. Lieutenant Ryan Ghost Murphy, a tall pilot with prematurely gray hair, sat 2 rows ahead of her. He'd been flying F-22 Raptors at Langley and had a reputation as one of the finest stick-and-rudder pilots in the Air Force. During the break, he approached Maya with what might have been sympathy or curiosity. "Heard you flew with the 20th Fighter." "Wing," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Good unit. Saw some action in Syria, I heard. 18 months. Close air support mostly, some air-to-air patrols. Any excitement?" "Enough." Maya didn't elaborate. The truth was she'd flown 47 combat missions, including 3 where she'd engaged surface-to-air missile sites and 2 where she'd provided emergency close air support for troops in contact. Her record spoke for itself, but she'd learned that reciting accomplishments often made her sound defensive. Captain Derek Venom Foster joined the conversation, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Must be nice having guaranteed admission," he said, loud enough for nearby pilots to hear. "Rest of us had to compete for our spots." Maya looked at him steadily. "I competed too. Same standards, same evaluations, same selection board." "Sure," Foster replied, his tone suggesting he didn't believe a word of it. "Just seems convenient that they needed to fill a quota right when you applied." The conversation died there, but Maya could see the doubt spreading through the room like ripples in a pond. By the end of the first day, she could feel the invisible walls being erected around her. Conversations stopped when she approached groups of pilots. Study sessions formed without her. When equipment was distributed, she consistently received the oldest, most worn gear available. That evening, alone in her quarters, Maya opened her father's flight log to a page she'd read hundreds of times. Day 15 of combat deployment, he'd written, took fire from SA-6 missiles today during a close air support mission. Thought about turning back, but saw friendly forces pinned down below. Sometimes you fly not because you're brave, but because someone else needs you to be brave for them. Fear is just another instrument reading you have to manage. Maya closed the log and looked out her window at the F-16s lined up on the flight line, their gray forms barely visible in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring her first training flight, her first chance to prove that she belonged here, not because of any program or policy, but because she was simply a better pilot than anyone expected. Colonel Kavanaugh had made it clear that he saw her as a liability, a distraction, a problem to be solved. The other pilots viewed her with suspicion at best, open hostility at worst. The program itself was designed to break down all but the most exceptional aviators, but Maya Blackwood had not come this far to be intimidated by men who'd never given her a chance to fail on her own merits. Her father had flown into hostile airspace knowing he might not come back, because someone on the ground was counting on him. Now it was her turn to prove that courage, skill, and determination weren't limited by gender. As she prepared her flight gear for the next morning, Maya made herself a promise. She would fly better than anyone expected, fight harder than anyone demanded, and prove beyond any doubt that the cockpit of a fighter jet was exactly where she belonged. The men in her squadron were about to discover that their assumptions about female fighter pilots were about to be shot down just as decisively as any enemy aircraft. The war for acceptance was about to begin, and Maya intended to win it in the air. The pre-dawn briefing room hummed with the low conversations of pilots reviewing flight plans and weather reports. Maya arrived 15 minutes early, as she always did, and found her assigned seat in the third row. The day's mission was basic. Formation flying and air-to-air combat maneuvering, fundamental skills that every pilot had mastered years ago, but which took on new complexity when performed at the weapons school's demanding standards. Colonel Kavanaugh entered precisely at 600 hours, his flight suit immaculate, and his expression suggesting he'd rather be anywhere else than teaching a class that included Maya. He moved to the front of the room with the confident stride of a man who'd never questioned his right to be there. "Today's exercise is simple," Kavanaugh announced, clicking his remote to display a tactical diagram on the screen. "Four-ship formation, defensive counter-air mission. You'll face simulated threats from multiple directions, and I'll be evaluating your ability to maintain tactical formation while responding to changing threats. Maya studied the diagram carefully. It was a standard scenario, but the devil was always in the details. The simulated enemy aircraft would be flown by instructor pilots who knew every trick in the book, and maintaining proper formation spacing while maneuvering defensively required split-second timing and absolute trust between pilots. Flight leads will be Murphy, Foster, Williams, and ... Kavanaugh paused, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Maya with obvious reluctance. Blackwood. Wingman assignments are posted on the board. A murmur rippled through the room. Being assigned as a flight lead on the second day was unusual, especially for someone the instructor clearly viewed as a liability. Maya suspected this wasn't a vote of confidence. It was a setup designed to showcase her failure in a leadership role. When she checked the assignment board, her suspicions were confirmed. Her wingman was Lieutenant Chris Bolt Anderson, a notoriously difficult pilot who'd washed out of 2 previous advanced training programs before barely qualifying for the weapons school. Anderson was known for poor radio discipline, erratic formation flying, and a tendency to panic under pressure. Pairing him with Maya wasn't an accident. "Looks like you got stuck with the problem child," Foster commented as he passed by the board. "Hope you're ready to babysit." Maya reviewed Anderson's training file while the other pilots conducted their pre-flight inspections. His record showed consistent struggles with situational awareness and communication. 3 different instructors had noted his tendency to break formation without warning when stressed. If Maya was going to succeed in today's mission, she'd need to compensate for a wingman who might abandon her at the worst possible moment. On the flight line, the morning sun was already intense, promising another scorching day in South Carolina. Maya conducted her pre-flight inspection with methodical precision, checking every system, every connection, every detail that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. As she worked, she noticed Tech Sergeant Amy Walsh, the aircraft maintenance chief, watching her with interest. "First time in our birds?" Walsh asked, approaching with a clipboard full of maintenance forms. "Yes, Sergeant, she's beautiful." Walsh smiled, the first genuinely friendly expression Maya had received since arriving at Shaw. "Tail number 847 has been good to us." Previous pilot called her Thunderbolt. "She's got some quirks, but should take care of you if you take care of her." "What kind of quirks?" "Fuel flow indicator tends to read low by about 50 pounds. Radar display occasionally flickers during high G turns, but it's just a display issue. The radar itself is solid. And she pulls slightly left during inverted flight, so you'll need to compensate with a bit of right rudder." Maya made mental notes of each item. Knowing an aircraft's individual characteristics could be the difference between a smooth flight and a dangerous surprise at 30,000 feet. "Thanks, Sergeant. I appreciate the heads up." "No problem, Captain. Showin' what you can do up there." As Maya climbed into the cockpit, she felt the familiar sense of coming home that every pilot experienced when settling into their aircraft. The F-16 was a fighter pilot's dream, responsive, powerful, and deadly when properly employed. She ran through her pre-start checklist with automatic precision, each switch and gauge checked and verified. Anderson's voice crackled through her headset during the pre-taxi check. "Storm Lead Bolt 2, ready for taxi when you are." His voice carried a nervous edge that didn't inspire confidence. "Bolt 2, Storm Lead. Follow standard taxi procedures. Maintain proper spacing, and stay on my wing no matter what happens up there. Acknowledge." "Storm Lead Bolt 2, copy all." The taxi to the runway gave Maya her first taste of how the other pilots viewed her new role. Murphy's flight passed them during the taxi, and she could see heads turning in cockpits as pilots pointed her out to each other. The radio chatter, usually professional and crisp, carried undertones of curiosity and skepticism. Tower cleared Maya's flight for takeoff, and she advanced the throttle to military power. The F-16 responded instantly, pressing her back into the seat as 30,000 pounds of thrust accelerated the fighter down the runway. At 150 knots, she pulled back on the stick and felt the aircraft leave the ground with eager grace. Bolt 2, gear up, maintain tactical formation, Maya commanded as they climbed toward their assigned altitude. Anderson's F-16 wavered slightly as he raised his landing gear, the aircraft bobbing up and down as he struggled to maintain proper spacing. Maya made small adjustments to her own flight path to compensate, keeping their formation intact despite her wingman's inconsistency. At 15,000 feet, the exercise began in earnest. Cavanaugh's voice came through the radio with the cold professionalism that Maya had already learned to associate with incoming trouble. Storm flight, threat bearing 030 20 miles, median altitude, multiple contacts inbound. Recommend defensive. Split. Maya's mind raced through the tactical options. A defensive split would separate her flight into elements that could engage threats from different directions, but it required precise timing and communication. With Anderson as her wingman, the maneuver carried significant risk. Bolt 2, storm. Lead, defensive split on my mark. Break right, maintain visual contact, call your shots. Storm lead, Bolt 2. Copy defensive split. The uncertainty in Anderson's voice was audible, but Maya had no choice but to trust that he'd follow through. She rolled her aircraft into a sharp right turn, pulling 6 Gs as she maneuvered to engage the simulated threats. Through her peripheral vision, she saw Anderson's F-16 hesitate for a crucial second before following her lead. That hesitation almost cost them the exercise. The instructor pilots playing enemy aircraft took advantage of Anderson's delayed response, simulating a missile. Lock on his aircraft. Maya reacted instantly, rolling inverted and diving below the threat axis to break the simulated lock. But the damage was done. Bolt 2, you're notionally dead, came Cavanaugh's voice over the radio. Storm lead, continue the exercise alone. Maya found herself flying against multiple simulated threats without wingman support, exactly the situation Cavanaugh had engineered. But instead of folding under the pressure, she felt a familiar calm settle over her, the same focus her father had described in his flight logs when facing impossible odds. For the next 20 minutes, Maya flew the mission of her life, engaging multiple threats while maintaining tactical awareness and proper radio communication. She used every lesson her father had taught her about energy management and situational awareness, every technique she'd learned during her combat deployments. When the exercise finally ended and the flights returned to base, Maya's hands were steady on the controls, but her mind was racing. She'd flown well better than well, but she knew Cavanaugh would find ways to criticize her performance. The real test would come during the debrief, where instructors traditionally dissected every decision and mistake in front of the entire class. As she taxied back to the parking area, Maya caught sight of her reflection in the cockpit mirror. She looked tired but determined, exactly like her father in the old photographs from his combat deployments. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, harder tests, and more opportunities for her detractors to prove their point. But today, alone against multiple threats at 20,000 feet, Maya Blackwood had proven something important to herself. She belonged in the cockpit of a fighter jet, and no amount of sabotage or systematic undermining would change that fundamental truth. The debrief room felt like a courtroom, with Colonel Cavanaugh presiding as judge, jury, and executioner. Maya sat in the front row, her flight suit still damp with sweat from the morning's exercise, while the other pilots filed in behind her. With the quiet satisfaction of spectators about to witness an execution, Cavanaugh clicked his remote, and the large screen displayed a computer-generated recreation of the morning's flight paths. Every turn, every maneuver, every tactical decision was laid bare in stark digital lines that traced across a map of South Carolina airspace. Today's exercise revealed several critical deficiencies, Cavanaugh began, his laser pointer dancing across the screen. Stormflight's performance was particularly instructive in demonstrating what happens when flight leadership prioritizes individual heroics over mission success. Maya kept her expression neutral, but inside she felt the familiar burn of injustice. She'd flown a nearly perfect mission under impossible circumstances, compensating for Anderson's failures while engaging multiple threats alone. But she already knew how this narrative would be shaped. "Storm Lead," Kavanaugh continued, turning his attention directly to Maya. "Your decision to execute a defensive split with an obviously struggling wingman showed poor tactical judgment. A competent flight leader would have recognized her wingman's limitations and adjusted her tactics accordingly." Lieutenant Murphy shifted in his seat behind Maya. "Sir, from my perspective, Storm Lead flew exceptionally well given the circumstances. She maintained tactical awareness and successfully engaged multiple threats after losing her wingmen." Kavanaugh's eyes flashed with irritation at the interruption. "Mr. Murphy, Storm Lead's individual performance is not the issue. Fighter aviation is a team sport. There's no place for lone wolves who sacrifice their wingmen for personal glory." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a crashed aircraft. Maya had done everything possible to compensate for Anderson's inadequacies, but Kavanaugh was twisting her competence into a character flaw. Around the room, she could see pilots exchanging glances, some nodding in agreement with the instructors. "Assessment." "Sir," Maya said quietly, "I followed standard defensive procedures. When Bolt 2 hesitated during the split, You what, Captain?" "Abandoned your wingmen to pursue your own engagement." Kavanaugh's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "In combat, that decision gets people killed." Maya bit back her response. Military protocol demanded respect for superior officers, even when they were systematically destroying her reputation. "Yes, sir." The debrief continued for another 30 minutes, with Kavanaugh finding fault with every decision Maya had made while glossing over Anderson's obvious mistakes. By the time they were dismissed, the damage was done. Maya could see it in the way pilots avoided eye contact with her, in the conversations that stopped when she approached. Over the following weeks, the isolation campaign intensified with methodical precision. During mealtimes, tables filled up. Just as Maya approached, leaving her to eat alone while animated conversations continued around her. Study groups formed organically among the other pilots, sharing notes and preparing for examinations together, while Maya found herself excluded from the informal networks that made the difference between success and failure. Captain Foster proved to be particularly effective at spreading doubt about Maya's abilities. She overheard him in the squadron bar one evening, his voice carrying just loud enough to ensure she could hear every word. "Look, I'm not saying anything against women in general," Foster was saying to a group of pilots gathered around a table near the back. "It's just that when you're pulling 9 gigaseconds in a high-threat environment, you want to know the person on your wing can handle the physical and mental stress. And if the instructors have concerns about someone's capability, maybe we should listen." "Lieutenant." Williams nodded in agreement. "Kavanaugh's got more combat experience than all of us combined. If he thinks she's not ready for advanced tactics, there's probably a reason." Maya felt a cold knot form in her stomach. It wasn't just the isolation anymore. Her fellow pilots were beginning to question her fundamental competence. In fighter aviation, trust was everything. Pilots needed absolute confidence in their wingman's abilities, because hesitation in combat meant death. If her squadron mates believed she was unreliable, she'd never be able to function effectively as part of a team. The psychological pressure was compounded by increasingly difficult training scenarios. Maya found herself consistently assigned the most challenging roles, leading complex multi-ship formations, managing air-to-air refueling operations in turbulent conditions, and executing precision bombing runs with minimal planning time. Each exercise seemed designed to push her beyond her limits while providing maximum opportunity for public failure. During a particularly demanding low-level navigation exercise, Maya was given a route that required flying through mountainous terrain at 500 feet above ground level, while maintaining precise timing to simulated target coordinates. The briefing materials were incomplete, missing critical terrain features and navigation waypoints that other pilots received. When she requested clarification, Kavanaugh dismissed her concerns. "In combat, Captain, you don't get perfect intelligence. Real pilots adapt and overcome instead of making excuses." Maya flew the mission using dead reckoning and visual navigation, arriving at her target coordinates within 30 seconds of scheduled time despite the missing information. But her performance was overshadowed by Anderson, who had been given complete route information and still managed to get lost twice during the flight. "Acceptable performance from storm flight today," Kavanaugh announced during the debrief, though timing accuracy could have been better. No mention was made of the missing navigation data or Maya's improvised solution. The breaking point came during week 4, when Maya discovered a note slipped under her quarters door. Written in block letters on plain paper, it contained a simple message: "Do everyone a favor and DOR before you get someone killed." DOR, drop on request, was military terminology for voluntarily quitting a program. Maya stared at the anonymous note for a long time, then carefully folded it and placed it in her desk drawer next to her father's flight logs. Someone wanted her to believe that everyone agreed she didn't belong, that her presence endangered the entire squadron. But that evening, as she reviewed her training records, Maya noticed something her detractors hadn't. Her simulation scores remained consistently in the top 3 of the class. Her instrument flying evaluations were flawless. Her tactical knowledge examinations scored higher than most of her peers. Despite every attempt to undermine her confidence and isolate her from support, her actual performance continued to exceed standards. She opened her father's flight log to a passage she'd never paid much attention to before. Day 23 of deployment. He'd written, "Squadron morale is tough right now. Lost Jenkins yesterday to SA-11. Everyone's questioning everything, looking for someone to blame." Reminded the young pilots that fear makes people cruel sometimes. The enemy isn't just the guy shooting at you, it's the voice in your head saying you don't belong here. Combat that voice first, and the rest gets easier. Maya closed the log and looked out her window at the F-16s parked on the flight line, their gray silhouettes barely visible in the darkness. Her father had faced doubt and fear from enemies trying to shoot him down. She was facing it from people who were supposed to be on her side. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more opportunities for public failure, and continued attempts to break her spirit. But as Maya prepared for another day of proving herself to people determined not to be convinced, she realized something important had changed inside her. She was no longer fighting for their acceptance. She was fighting for something much more valuable: proof to herself that excellence could survive any campaign designed to destroy it. The isolation hurt, the sabotage was real, and the pressure was enormous. But Maya Blackwood had not come this far to surrender to fear disguised as professional judgment. The war for her place in the cockpit was far from over, but she was beginning to understand the real battlefield wasn't in the sky. It was in the minds of people who'd already decided what she could and couldn't accomplish. The morning briefing for Week 5's capstone exercise carried an electric tension that Maya had learned to recognize as dangerous. Colonel Kavanaugh stood at the front of the room with the satisfied expression of a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. Behind him, the projection screen displayed a complex tactical scenario that made Maya's stomach clench with anticipation. "Gentlemen," Kavanaugh began, his eyes finding Maya in the third row, "today's exercise will test everything you've learned about multi-threat environments and tactical decision-making under extreme pressure. You'll be facing the most challenging Scenario in our curriculum: a coordinated attack by superior numbers with limited support and degraded communications. Maya studied the mission parameters with growing unease. 8 F-16s would defend against 12 simulated enemy aircraft in a complex airspace filled with surface-to-air threats and electronic jamming. The defending flights would have to coordinate their response while dealing with communications. Blackouts and equipment failures designed to simulate combat damage. Flight assignments. Kavanaugh continued, clicking his remote. Eagle Flight, Murphy and Williams. Falcon Flight, Foster and Rodriguez. Viper Flight, Anderson and Carter. He paused dramatically. And Flying Solo Combat Air Patrol will be Storm Lead Captain Blackwood. The room fell silent. Solo Cap meant Maya would be facing multiple threats alone, while the other pilots worked in coordinated pairs. It was a mission profile typically reserved for the most experienced pilots, or as a punishment detail for someone who'd failed to work effectively as part of a team. "Sir," Lieutenant Murphy interjected, "isn't Solo Cap against standard doctrine for this type of exercise?" Kavanaugh's smile was cold. "In combat, Mr. Murphy, aircraft get separated from their wingmen. Pilots get shot down. Equipment fails. A competent fighter pilot must be prepared to operate independently when circumstances demand it." His gaze locked on Maya. "Captain Blackwood has consistently demonstrated a preference for individual action over team coordination. This exercise will test whether that approach can succeed when the stakes are real." Maya felt every pair of eyes in the room turn toward her. The implication was clear: she was being set up for a public failure that would justify every doubt that had been raised about her capabilities. Flying alone against multiple threats while her classmates worked in teams wasn't just difficult. It was designed to be impossible. "Any questions about the mission parameters?" Kavanaugh asked, his tone suggesting that questions would be viewed as weakness. Maya raised her hand slowly. "Sir, what are the rules of engagement for the Solo Cap?" "Standard defensive posture. Protect the high-value assets. Engage threats as they present themselves. Maintain tactical awareness of friendly positions." Kavanaugh's voice carried a hint of mockery. "Think you can handle it, Captain?" "Yes, sir." Maya's voice was steady, but inside she was calculating odds and angles, trying to find some tactical approach that might give her a chance of success. The pre-flight briefing revealed the full scope of what she was facing. While the other flights would have mutual support and coordinated tactics, Maya would be operating alone in the most threat-dense part of the airspace. Her assigned sector included 3 simulated SAM sites, multiple air-to-air threats, and electronic jamming that would degrade her radar and communications. As the pilots dispersed to their aircraft, Maya overheard Foster talking to Rodriguez near the squadron board. "This is going to be painful to watch," Foster was saying. "Kavanaugh's finally going to prove his point about women and fighters." "Maybe she'll surprise us," Rodriguez replied, though his tone suggested he doubted it. "Come on, man. Solo against those odds? She's going to get smoked, and then maybe Command will realize this whole experiment was a mistake." Maya continued walking toward her aircraft, her expression unchanged. But Foster's words echoed in her mind. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every woman who might want to fly fighters in the future. If she failed spectacularly today, it wouldn't just end her career. It would be used as evidence that women couldn't handle the pressure. Of aerial combat. Tech, Sergeant Walsh was waiting by Maya's F-16, her expression serious as she handed over the aircraft forms. "Heard about your mission today," Walsh said quietly. "That's a tough assignment, Captain. I've had tougher." Maya tried to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Aircraft's in perfect condition. Full fuel, all systems checked and double-checked." Walsh paused, then added, "My daughter's 8 years old. Wants to be a fighter pilot when she grows up. Show her it's possible, would you?" Maya felt a surge of emotion that she quickly suppressed. "I'll do my best, Sergeant." The taxi to the runway gave Maya time to run through her tactical options one more time. She'd studied the threat environment extensively, memorizing the locations of simulated SAM sites and anticipated enemy patrol routes. Her only advantage was that the instructor pilots playing enemy aircraft wouldn't expect sophisticated tactics from a single defender. They'd probably underestimate her until it was too late. As she lined up for takeoff, Maya's radio crackled with the familiar pre-mission communications from the other flights. Murphy and Williams were coordinating their defensive setup. Foster and Rodriguez were discussing mutual support tactics. Anderson and Carter were running through their contingency procedures. Maya flew alone into the morning sky, climbing toward an altitude where she'd face overwhelming odds with no backup and no margin for error. Below her, South Carolina's landscape spread out in the early sunlight, peaceful and serene. Above her waited an exercise designed to prove she didn't belong in a fighter cockpit. But as Maya leveled off at 25,000 feet and began her approach to the combat area, she felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't experienced since arriving at Shaw. Not fear, not anxiety, but a cold, focused calm that reminded her of her father's descriptions of combat. They'd given her an impossible mission, sabotaged her equipment, isolated her from support, and set her up for public failure. But they'd also given her something they hadn't intended: complete tactical freedom. With no wingman to protect and no formation to maintain, she could fly. The kind of aggressive, unconventional mission that her father had written about in his combat logs. "Storm Lead, you are cleared into the exercise area," came the controller's voice. "Good luck up there." Maya clicked her radio twice in acknowledgement, then switched to tactical frequency. Ahead of her, the most challenging 15 minutes of her flying career waited in the morning sky. Behind her lay months of systematic undermining and deliberate sabotage. But in the cockpit of her F-16, with her hands on the controls and her father's lessons echoing in her memory, Maya Blackwood was exactly where she belonged. They wanted to see what she could do alone against impossible odds. They were about to find out. The exercise began at 0800 hours with Maya entering the combat area alone while 12 simulated enemy aircraft positioned themselves for a coordinated attack. Her radar screen painted a picture that would have terrified most pilots: multiple contacts approaching from different vectors, surface-to-air missile sites tracking her movement, and electronic jamming that turned her communications into static-filled chaos. "Exercise control to all players," came the announcement over the radio. "Fights on. I say again, fights on." Maya immediately dove to 500 feet above ground level, using the terrain to mask her approach from the enemy aircraft orbiting at higher altitudes. This was the kind of aggressive, low-level flying that required absolute precision. One moment of inattention would mean flying into the ground at 400 knots. Her first tactical decision proved crucial. Instead of trying to engage the enemy aircraft directly, Maya targeted the simulated SAM sites that were providing area denial for the attackers. Flying through a mountain valley at treetop level, she simulated destroying the first missile site with a precision bombing run that left the enemy's defensive network compromised. "SAM Site Alpha is down," the exercise controller announced. "Storm Lead, good hit." But Maya's low-altitude approach had attracted attention. 2 enemy F-16s broke from their patrol pattern and dove toward her position, trying to trap her in the valley where she'd have limited maneuvering room. Maya's response was textbook aggression. Instead of running from the superior numbers, she climbed directly toward the attacking aircraft, using the F-16's superior climb rate to gain an energy advantage. At 15,000 feet, she rolled inverted and dove toward the first attacker, simulating a head-on missile engagement before braking hard left to avoid his wingman. Fox 2, Fox 2. Maya called over the radio, indicating a simulated heat-seeking missile shot. Splash 1 Bandit. The exercise controller confirmed the kill. Bandit 03 is down. Good shot, Stormlead. But Maya's aggressive tactics had cost her energy and altitude, leaving her vulnerable to the remaining enemy aircraft converging on her position. Her radar warning receiver screamed with multiple missile lock-ons as 4 enemy fighters coordinated their attack. This was the moment Kavanaugh had engineered Maya alone, low on energy, facing superior numbers with nowhere to run. In the squadron debrief, he'd used this situation to demonstrate that individual heroics were no substitute for coordinated teamwork. Maya's father had faced similar odds over Afghanistan, outnumbered and outgunned with friendly forces depending on his survival. His flight log entry about that mission had been brief. Sometimes you can't outrun the problem. Sometimes you have to fly through it. Maya flew through it. Instead of defensive maneuvering, she turned directly toward the largest group of enemy aircraft, forcing them to break their formation to avoid a head-on collision. The unexpected aggression disrupted their coordinated attack and gave Maya the opening she needed. Rolling inverted at 300 knots, she dove toward the deck while the enemy aircraft struggled to reposition for another attack. Her low-altitude escape took her through a series of valleys and ridges that broke visual contact and forced the enemy to rely on intermittent radar contacts. For the next 10 minutes, Maya fought a running battle across South Carolina's landscape, using terrain masking and aggressive maneuvering to survive against overwhelming odds. She simulated destroying 2 more enemy aircraft while avoiding multiple missile shots, demonstrating flying skills that left even the instructor pilot struggling to keep up. "This is getting ridiculous," Foster's voice came through the radio during a brief communications window. "How is she still alive up there?" Maya didn't respond. She was too busy setting up her next attack run, using a ridgeline to approach another group of enemy aircraft from an unexpected angle. Her radar had been jammed for the last 5 minutes, forcing her to rely on visual contact and tactical instinct. The breakthrough came when Maya realized the enemy's greatest strength, their numbers, was also their weakness. With 12 aircraft trying to coordinate in the same airspace, they were getting in each other's way, blocking shots and limiting maneuverability. Maya exploited this confusion with a series of hit-and-run attacks that picked off isolated aircraft while avoiding decisive engagement. She'd learned this tactic from studying her father's combat reports. When outnumbered, force the enemy to fight your fight instead of theirs. Stormlead, multiple bandits bearing 180, low altitude, approaching fast, came a warning from exercise. Control. Maya checked her fuel gauge and smiled grimly. She had enough gas for one more aggressive maneuver, and she intended to make it count. Banking hard right, she climbed toward a group of 3 enemy aircraft that had been stalking her for the last several minutes. What happened next would be analyzed and discussed in tactical flying courses for years to come. Maya executed a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible in an F-16, a high G barrel roll that transitioned into an inverted climbing spiral, gaining altitude while maintaining visual contact with all 3 enemy aircraft at the apex of her climb. With her aircraft hanging on the edge of a stall, Maya simulated simultaneous missile shots at 2 different targets before rolling inverted and diving toward the third. The complex maneuver required split-second timing and perfect aircraft control, the kind of flying that separated good pilots from exceptional ones. "Fox 2, Fox 2. Maya called. "Splash 2 bandits." "Multiple kills confirmed." The exercise controller announced, obvious amazement in his voice. "Stormlead, outstanding shooting." But Maya wasn't finished. Her diving attack on the 3rd enemy aircraft put her in perfect position for a guns kill, a close-range engagement that required flying skills few pilots possessed. "Guns, guns, guns." Maya transmitted as she lined up her shot. "Splash 3. The exercise ended with Maya having survived 15 minutes of air-to-air combat against overwhelming odds, destroying 5 enemy aircraft while taking no damage herself. As she climbed to a safe altitude and began her return to base, Maya's hands were steady on the controls, but her heart was racing with adrenaline and accomplishment. She'd done more than survive. Kavanaugh's impossible test, she demonstrated flying skills that exceeded anything her classmates had accomplished during the entire program. The radio chatter from other pilots was filled with amazement and disbelief at what they'd witnessed. "Did you see that barrel roll sequence?" Murphy's voice came through clearly. "I've never seen anything like that in an F-16. She just took apart 12 aircraft by herself," Williams added. "That was surgical." Maya flew back towards Shaw Air Force Base, knowing that everything had changed. The exercise that was supposed to prove her inadequacy had instead demonstrated capabilities that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. In 15 minutes of aerial combat, she'd shattered every assumption about what a female fighter pilot could accomplish under pressure. As the runway appeared ahead of her, Maya thought about her father's words. "Sometimes you fly not because you're brave, but because someone else needs you to be brave for them." Today, she'd been brave for Tech Sergeant Walsh's 8-year-old daughter, for every woman who'd ever dreamed of flying fighters, and most importantly, for herself. The landing was smooth and precise, like everything else Maya had done that morning. But as she taxied toward the parking area, she could see ground crews and pilots gathering to watch her return. Word of her performance had already spread throughout the base. Tomorrow would bring the debrief, where Kavanaugh would have to explain how his impossible scenario had been defeated by the pilot he'd worked so hard to discredit. Maya was curious to see how he'd spin this particular outcome. The debrief room buzzed with an energy Maya had never experienced before. Instead of the usual quiet tension that preceded her public dissection, pilots clustered in animated groups, replaying the morning's exercise with the excitement of witnesses to something extraordinary. When Maya entered the room, conversations didn't stop, they shifted to include her. "Storm, that inverted climbing spiral was insane," Lieutenant Williams said, approaching her with genuine admiration. "I've been flying for 8 years, and I've never seen anything like that sequence." Murphy nodded in agreement. "The way you used terrain masking to break up their formation was textbook. Where'd you learn to fly like that?" For the first time since arriving at Shaw, Maya found herself surrounded by pilots who wanted to understand her tactics rather than dismiss them. The questions came rapid fire. How did she maintain situational awareness with degraded radar? What was her energy management strategy during the multiple engagements? How did she calculate the timing for simultaneous missile shots? Maya answered each question professionally, sharing the techniques her father had taught her and the lessons she'd learned during combat deployments. But she could see that her classmates were viewing her differently, now not as a diversity hire or social experiment, but as a pilot whose skills they wanted to learn from. Colonel Kavanaugh entered the briefing room 15 minutes late, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. Maya suspected he'd spent those 15 minutes trying to figure out how to frame her success as a failure, or at least minimize its significance. Today's exercise provided valuable lessons about individual versus team tactics, Kavanaugh began, his voice lacking its usual commanding confidence. While Stormlead's performance was adequate, it demonstrated the risks of abandoning coordinated doctrine in favor of improvised maneuvers. Lieutenant Murphy raised his hand. "Sir, with respect, Stormlead's performance was exceptional. 5 kills against 12 aircraft isn't adequate, it's unprecedented." Kavanaugh's jaw tightened. "Mr. Murphy, individual kill ratios aren't the primary metric for evaluating tactical success. In a real combat environment, Stormlead's aggressive tactics would have left friendly forces without coordinated air cover." Maya listened to Kavanaugh's critique with detached interest. He was technically correct about some aspects of her approach. Her tactics had been unconventional and aggressive. But his analysis ignored the fundamental reality that she'd accomplished the mission objective while facing impossible odds. "Sir," Maya said quietly, The mission parameters specified defensive counter-air with protection of high-value assets. All simulated enemy aircraft were neutralized or driven from the area, and no friendly assets were damaged. Mission accomplished. The room fell silent. Maya had just contradicted a superior officer in front of the entire class, using his own mission criteria to validate her performance. It was a career-ending move under normal circumstances, but these weren't normal circumstances. Kavanaugh stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he nodded slowly. "Point taken, Captain. Your unconventional approach did achieve the stated objectives." The admission sent ripples through the room. Maya could see pilots exchanging glances, recognizing that something fundamental had shifted in the dynamic between instructor and student. The transformation became official. 3 days later, when Major Jessica Eagle Thompson arrived at Shaw to brief the class on their upcoming deployment. Thompson was a legend in fighter aviation, the first woman to command an F-22 squadron and a veteran of 3 combat tours. Her presence at Shaw meant only one thing: the weapons school graduates were going to war. "Gentlemen," Thompson began, then paused and looked directly at Maya. "And lady, you're being deployed to Ramstein Air Base in Germany for Operation Sky Guardian. Intelligence indicates increased Russian air activity along NATO borders, and command needs our best tactical minds forward deployed to deter aggression." Maya felt her pulse quicken. This was what every fighter pilot trained for the chance: to use their skills in defense of American interests and allied nations. But deployment also meant her classmates would see her performance under real combat conditions, with real stakes and real consequences. "Your squadron will be integrated with NATO air defense operations," Thompson continued. "You'll be flying defensive counter-air missions, maintaining air superiority over critical infrastructure, and providing rapid response to any border incursions." After the briefing, Thompson approached Maya privately. "Captain Blackwood, I've been following your progress here at Shaw. Your performance in yesterday's exercise was exceptional." "Thank you, ma'am. I want you to know that there are people watching your career with great interest. The success of women in fighter aviation depends partly on pilots like you proving that excellence has no gender limitations." Thompson's expression was serious. "No pressure, but you're carrying more than your own reputation over there." Maya nodded, understanding the weight of what Thompson wasn't saying directly. She'd become a symbol whether she wanted to or not, proof that women could excel in the most demanding military roles. Her performance in combat would influence policy decisions about female fighter pilots for years to come. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of intensive preparation. Intelligence briefings on Russian aircraft capabilities and tactics, mission planning for various threat scenarios, weapons training with live ordnance. And throughout it all, Maya noticed that the dynamic with her classmates had fundamentally changed. Foster, who'd been one of her harshest critics, approached her during a tactical planning session. "Storm, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about your capabilities, and I let my preconceptions cloud my judgment." Maya accepted the apology graciously, but she could see that Foster's change of heart was motivated as much by pragmatism as genuine remorse. In combat, pilots wanted the most capable aviators on their wing, regardless of gender or politics. Colonel Kavanaugh's transformation was more subtle, but equally significant. He began incorporating Maya's unconventional tactics into his lesson plans, presenting her aggressive energy management and terrain masking techniques as examples of advanced tactical thinking. He never directly acknowledged his previous antagonism, but his professional treatment of Maya spoke louder than any apology. The night before deployment, Maya sat in her quarters reading her father's final flight log entry. Heading into combat. Tomorrow, he'd written. Not afraid of dying, afraid of letting down the people counting on me. But I've trained for this my entire career. Time to prove that all those hours of preparation were worth something. Maya closed the log and looked around her Spartan quarters. Tomorrow she'd be flying combat missions over European airspace, protecting NATO assets from Russian aggression. The pilots who'd once questioned her presence would be depending on her skills and judgment when enemy aircraft appeared on radar screens. 6 months ago, she'd arrived at Shaw Air Force Base as an unwelcome outsider fighting for basic acceptance. Now she was deploying as a proven warrior, whose tactical innovations were being studied and emulated throughout the fighter community. But Maya knew that the real test was still ahead. Training exercises and simulations could demonstrate technical proficiency, but combat revealed character. In the skies over Eastern Europe, with real missiles and real consequences, she'd discover whether all her preparation had been enough. The war that would define her legacy was about to begin. Ramstein Air Base in Germany felt different from Shaw, older, more serious, with the weight of decades of Cold War tension still hanging in the crisp European air. Maya's squadron arrived on a gray October morning, their F-16s lined up on the Maya's tarmac like sleeping predators waiting to be unleashed. The intelligence briefing that afternoon painted a concerning picture of Russian activity along the Baltic borders. Increased fighter patrols, aggressive intercepts of NATO reconnaissance aircraft, and what analysts described as probing missions designed to test Western response times and capabilities. The Russians are playing a dangerous game, briefed Colonel Patricia Kane, the wing commander at Ramstein. They're pushing boundaries, seeing how far they can go before we push back. Your job is to make sure they understand that NATO airspace is protected by the best fighter pilots in the world. Maya sat in the front row with the other weapons school graduates, studying satellite photos of Russian air bases and memorizing the silhouettes of enemy aircraft. The MiG-29s and Su-27s posed serious threats, fast, maneuverable, and flown by pilots with extensive training and combat experience. Captain Blackwood, Colonel Kane said, you'll be flying with Viper Squadron as deputy flight lead. Your performance at Shaw has earned you a position with our most experienced combat pilots. Maya felt a surge of pride mixed with nervous energy. Viper Squadron was legendary veterans of conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. Being accepted into their ranks represented the ultimate validation of her skills and training. Flight lead was Captain Jake "Razor" Murphy, her former classmate, who'd become one of her strongest supporters after witnessing her performance in training. Their wingmen were Captain Alex "Thunder" Rodriguez and Lieutenant Chris Bolt Anderson, the same pilot who'd struggled as Maya's wingman during her early training flights but had improved dramatically under her mentorship. First mission is a standard defensive counter-air patrol, Murphy briefed the flight. 4-ship formation, Eastern Sector, maintain vigilance for Russian incursions. Intelligence suggests they've been testing our response times with high-speed approaches to the border. Maya studied the tactical map, noting the geography that would influence their patrol. Rolling hills and dense forests provided limited visual references, while electronic warfare threats meant their radars could be jammed without warning. Navigation and situational awareness would be critical. Weather's going to be a factor, Rodriguez added. Low cloud deck, limited visibility, with possible icing conditions above 15,000 feet. Not ideal flying weather, but the Russians might use it as cover for aggressive maneuvers. The pre-flight briefing concluded with emergency procedures and communications protocols. Maya felt the familiar pre-combat tension that every fighter pilot experienced, a mixture of excitement, anticipation, and the sobering awareness that training was over and real. Consequences were about to begin. Walking to her aircraft that evening, Maya noticed Tech Sergeant Walsh had somehow managed to get herself assigned to the maintenance crew at Ramstein. The familiar face was a welcome sight in an environment where everything else was new and potentially dangerous. "Figured you might want a familiar crew chief over here," Walsh said with a smile. "Besides, my daughter made me promise to take care of the lady fighter pilot she keeps talking about." Maya's F-16 was in perfect condition, every system checked, every gauge reading normal, every weapon properly configured. As she strapped into the cockpit, Maya felt the calm focus that came with thorough preparation and absolute confidence in her equipment. "Viper flight, you're cleared for taxi," came the tower controller's voice. "Wind 270 at 15, visibility 3 miles in light rain. Good hunting out there." The 4 F-16s taxied in formation toward the active runway, their navigation lights cutting through the gathering dusk. Maya checked her instruments one final time, then focused on Murphy's aircraft ahead of her in the formation. "Viper flight, cleared for takeoff," the tower announced. Murphy's F-16 accelerated down the runway with Maya close behind, their aircraft lifting off into the gray European sky. The transition from peaceful airbase to potential combat zone happened. Instantly, one moment, they were training pilots on a routine mission. The next, they were armed defenders of NATO airspace. At 20,000 feet, Viper flight leveled off and began their patrol pattern along the eastern border. Maya's radar screen showed friendly aircraft scattered across the area as early warning aircraft, tanker planes for refueling, and other fighter flights maintaining the protective umbrella over European territory. "Viper flight, Magic Eye," came the voice of the AWACS controller. "Multiple contacts bearing 09050 miles, medium altitude. Track unknown, request identification." Maya's pulse quickened. Unknown contacts approaching from the east meant potential Russian aircraft probing NATO defenses. This was exactly the scenario they'd trained for, but now it was real. "Viper lead copies," Murphy responded. "Viper flight, combat spread formation, approach with caution." The 4 F-16s adjusted their spacing and altitude, positioning themselves for optimal mutual support while maintaining visual contact. Maya's radar began painting intermittent contacts as the unknown aircraft approached, the signature of fighters, using electronic countermeasures to mask their exact numbers and positions. "Magic Eye, Viper lead. I'm showing 4, possibly 6 contacts. Russian IFF signatures, approaching at 600 knots. Viper lead, Magic Eye. Contacts are now 30 miles from border. Recommend intercept and identification." Maya felt her training take over as adrenaline sharpened her focus. This was her first real intercept mission, approaching potentially hostile aircraft to identify their intentions and demonstrate NATO's readiness to defend Allied airspace. "Viper flight, music on," Murphy commanded, directing them to activate their radar warning systems. Immediately, Maya's cockpit filled with electronic tones, indicating multiple radar emissions from the approaching aircraft. Through her canopy, Maya could see the other F-16s in her flight, their gray forms barely visible against the darkening sky. Below them, the lights of European cities created a peaceful contrast to the tension building in the cockpit. "Viper lead, Magic Eye. Contacts are now 20 miles from border, maintaining current heading and speed. You are cleared to intercept and identify." Maya checked her weapon systems one final time, ensuring her missiles were armed and ready. The next few minutes would determine whether this patrol remained a peaceful demonstration of strength or escalated into something far more dangerous. In the distance, barely visible through the haze and gathering darkness, Maya caught her first glimpse of enemy aircraft, sleek Russian fighters approaching at high speed with unknown intentions. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Combat is 90% preparation and 10% execution. But that 10% determines whether you come home." Maya was as prepared as training could make her. Now it was time for the execution. "Viper flight, contacts now 15 miles and closing," came the AWACS controller's voice, tense with anticipation. Count shows 6 Russian fighters, mixed MiG-29s and Su-27s. They're maintaining current heading toward the border. Maya's radar screen painted the approaching aircraft with increasing clarity. 6 contacts in loose formation, flying fast and aggressive. The Russians were probing NATO defenses, testing response times, and looking for weaknesses in the protective screen over European airspace. Viper lead, Magic Eye. You are cleared to close for visual identification. Rules of engagement. Defensive posture unless fired upon. Murphy's voice came through the radio with professional calm. Viper flight, close formation, approach for positive. ID, weapons tight unless threatened. The 4 F-16s accelerated toward the approaching Russian aircraft, closing the distance at a combined speed of over 1,200 miles per hour. Maya checked her fuel, weapon status, and radar one final time. Everything was perfect, but she could feel her heart rate increasing as the gap between the two formations shrank. At 8 miles, Maya caught her first visual contact, 2 MiG-29. Fulcrums flying in loose formation, their distinctive twin tails clearly visible against the darkening sky. Behind them, she could make out the larger silhouettes of Su-27 flankers, deadly air superiority fighters with advanced radar and long-range missiles. Viper lead has visual on multiple bandits, Murphy transmitted. 2 MiG-29s, 4 Su-27s. Maintaining aggressive posture. Maya was flying as Murphy's wingman, positioned to his right and slightly behind. Rodriguez and Anderson formed the second element, ready to provide mutual support if the situation escalated. The formation was textbook perfect, exactly as they'd practiced hundreds of times in training. At 5 miles, the Russian formation began to spread out, with 2 aircraft climbing while the others maintained level flight. Maya recognized the tactic. Immediately, they were positioning themselves for a potential attack while maintaining the pretense of a routine patrol. Viper flight, bandits are maneuvering defensively, Maya called over the radio. Recommend we match their altitude separation. Good call, Storm, Murphy replied. Viper 3 and 4, take high cap. Storm and I will maintain level intercept. Rodriguez and Anderson climbed to 25,000 feet while Maya and Murphy continued their approach at 20,000. The tactical positioning gave Viper flight overlapping fields of fire while maintaining visual contact with all enemy aircraft. At 3 miles, Maya could see the Russian pilots clearly through her canopy. They were flying aggressively, making sharp turns and altitude changes designed to demonstrate their aircraft's capabilities. It was a show of force intended to intimidate the NATO pilots. Then everything changed. Viper lead, Magic Eye. Additional contacts bearing 090, low altitude. 4 more Russian fighters approaching fast. Maya's blood ran cold. The initial 6 aircraft had been a diversion. The real threat was 4 additional fighters approaching. At low altitude, using terrain masking to avoid radar detection until the last possible moment. Viper flight, we've got multiple threats, Murphy called. Defensive split, engage as targets present. The peaceful intercept mission had just become a 10 versus 4 dogfight with Russian aircraft attempting to penetrate NATO airspace through deception and overwhelming numbers. Maya's training kicked in automatically as she rolled her F-16 into a defensive turn, trying to maintain visual contact with multiple threats while avoiding missile lock-ons. Storm, 2 bandits climbing toward you from the south. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio. Brake left, brake left. Maya rolled inverted and pulled hard left, feeling 7 gigaseconds crush her into the seat as she maneuvered to avoid the approaching MiG-29s. Through her peripheral vision, she could see missile trails crisscrossing the sky as the engagement escalated into full combat. Fox 2. Anderson's voice came through clearly. Splash 1 bandit. Maya's radar warning receiver screamed with multiple missile lock-ons as 2 Su-27s coordinated their attack on her position. She was outnumbered, outgunned, and rapidly running out of maneuvering room. This was the moment Colonel Kavanaugh had warned about, when individual skill would be tested against overwhelming odds, when all the training scenarios would be compressed into seconds of life-or-death decision-making. Maya's response was pure instinct, guided by thousands of hours of preparation. Instead of defensive maneuvering, she turned directly toward the nearest Su-27, forcing him to break his missile lock to avoid a head-on collision. The aggressive move disrupted the coordinated attack and gave her the opening she needed. "Fox 2, Maya called, launching a heat-seeking missile at the Su-27 as it rolled away from her approach. "Good hit, Splash 1 Bandit." Her first combat kill, but there was no time for celebration. 2 more Russian fighters were diving toward Murphy's position, and Rodriguez was calling for help as he engaged multiple threats at high altitude. The sky had become a chaotic maze of contrails, missile launches, and radio calls as 10 aircraft fought for survival in European airspace. Maya rolled her F-16 into a climbing turn, using the aircraft's superior thrust-to-weight ratio to gain altitude advantage over the remaining Su-27s. Below her, she could see Murphy engaging 2 MiG-29s in a turning fight that would test both pilots' endurance and skill. "Viper lead, you've got a bandit on your 6, Maya called. "I'm coming down to assist." Maya dove toward Murphy's position, building speed as she descended from 22,000 feet. The MiG-29 chasing Murphy was perfectly positioned for a missile shot, unaware that death was approaching from above at 600 knots. "Fox 2, Maya transmitted as her second missile found its target. "Splash 2. The MiG-29 exploded in a fireball that lit up the evening sky, debris scattered across miles of European countryside. Maya had just saved her flight lead's life, while scoring her second kill of the engagement, but the fight was far from over. The remaining Russian aircraft were regrouping for another attack, and Maya's fuel was getting low after several minutes of high-G maneuvering. She checked her weapons status: 1 missile remaining, plus her 20mm cannon with 500 rounds. "Viper flight, consolidate north of current position," Murphy ordered. "We've got multiple bandits still in the fight." Maya climbed toward the rendezvous point, her eyes scanning the sky for threats. The radio chatter indicated that Rodriguez and Anderson were still engaged with Russian fighters, and additional NATO aircraft were en route to assist Dot as she leveled off at 23,000 feet. Maya saw them too. Su-27s climbing toward her position in a coordinated attack. They'd been waiting for her to separate from the main fight, and now they had her isolated and vulnerable. Maya's fuel gauge showed she had maybe 10 minutes of combat maneuvering left before she'd need to head for a tanker. Her missile count was down to 1. The odds were bad and getting worse, but Maya Blackwood had not come this far to retreat when the mission hung in the balance. The Russian aircraft represented a direct threat to NATO airspace and Allied security. Someone had to stop them. That someone was her. The 2 Su-27 flankers climbed toward Maya's position with predatory precision, their pilots clearly experienced in air-to-air combat. Maya could see them coordinating their attack, one aircraft climbing directly toward her while the other positioned for a flanking maneuver that would trap her between overlapping fields of fire. Maya's tactical situation was desperate. Low fuel, 1 missile, and facing 2 of Russia's most capable fighters flown by pilots who'd probably been expecting an easy victory against NATO forces. Her radar warning receiver painted both aircraft with solid lock-on tones, indicating they were prepared to engage with long-range missiles. "Storm, you've got 2 bandits climbing fast toward your position," Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio. "I'm engaged and can't assist." Maya was alone, exactly as she'd been during that training exercise at Shaw when Kavanaugh had tried to prove she couldn't handle pressure. But this time the stakes were real, not just her career, but the lives of her squadron mates and the security of NATO airspace. Maya's response came from instincts honed through thousands of hours of training and 2 previous kills in the same engagement. Instead of defensive maneuvering, she dove directly toward the lead Su-27, building speed and forcing him to react to her aggressive approach. The Russian pilot wasn't expecting such bold tactics from a supposedly outnumbered opponent. He broke his missile lock and rolled hard left to avoid a head-on collision, disrupting his wingman's attack solution and giving Maya the opening she'd been looking for. At 500 knots in a shallow dive, Maya fired her final heat-seeking missile at the second Su-27 as it tried to reposition for another attack. The missile tracked perfectly, finding the flanker's exhaust signature and detonating in a spectacular fireball that sent debris tumbling toward the forests below. "Fox 2, Splash 3, Maya called, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. But killing the second Su-27 had cost Maya altitude and energy, leaving her vulnerable to the remaining Russian fighter. The pilot, now thoroughly angry at having his wingman shot down, turned aggressively toward Maya's position with obvious intent to finish the engagement. Maya's weapon status was critical, no missiles remaining. Only her 20mm cannon with 500 rounds of ammunition. Against a Su-27 with advanced radar and long-range missiles, getting close enough for a gun's kill would require flying skills that pushed both pilot and aircraft to their absolute limits. The Su-27 pilot made his intentions clear by firing 2 missiles at Maya's position from maximum range. Maya saw the missile launches and immediately began defensive maneuvering, pulling maximum Gs while dispensing chaff and flares to confuse the incoming weapons. The first missile lost lock and exploded harmlessly behind her aircraft. The second missile maintained tracking, forcing Maya into a series of brutal high G turns that tested the F-16 structural limits and her own physical endurance. At 8 Gs, Maya felt her vision beginning to gray at the edges despite her anti-G suit. The missile was still tracking, closing the distance with deadly persistence. In desperation, Maya rolled inverted and pulled toward the ground, using terrain masking to brake. The missile's lock just seconds before impact. The missile exploded against a hillside 200 feet below Maya's aircraft, close enough that she felt the shockwave through her airframe. She was now at 5,000 feet above ground level, dangerously low for high-speed maneuvering, with an angry Russian pilot diving toward her position for the kill shot. Maya's training had prepared her for this moment, her father's lessons about energy management, Kavanaugh's demands for perfection under pressure, and her own hard-won understanding that survival required thinking faster than the enemy. The Su-27 dove toward Maya's position with speed and altitude advantage, confident that the engagement was over. His pilot had every reason to be confident. Superior aircraft, superior position, and an opponent who appeared to be out of options. Maya proved him wrong. Instead of trying to outrun the Su-27, Maya turned directly into his attack, climbing at maximum power while the Russian fighter dove toward her position. The 2 aircraft approached each other at a combined speed of over 1,400 miles per hour in a deadly game of aerial chicken. At the last possible second, Maya rolled her F-16 inverted and pulled maximum Gs, using the aircraft's superior maneuverability to position herself behind the Su-27 as it flashed past her canopy. The maneuver was so aggressive that it pushed both pilot and aircraft beyond normal operational limits. Maya found herself 500 feet behind the Su-27, perfectly positioned for a gun's kill, but with only seconds before the Russian pilot could maneuver out of her firing solution. Her hands moved with automatic precision, lining up the shot while compensating for both aircraft's movement through 3-dimensional space. "Guns, guns, guns," Maya transmitted as her 20mm cannon opened fire. the armor-piercing rounds found there. Target, stitching across the Su-27's wing, and fuselage in a line of destruction that severed control cables and punctured fuel lines. The Russian fighter began trailing smoke and debris as its pilot fought to maintain control. Maya watched through her gun sight as the Su-27's canopy separated from the aircraft, followed immediately by the pilot's ejection seat. The Russian aviator had recognized that his aircraft was doomed and chosen survival over continuing the fight. Splash 4. Maya called as the pilotless Su-27 tumbled toward the ground in a shower of burning debris. Bandit pilot ejected, chute observed. The radio erupted with voices as her squadron mates acknowledged her fourth kill of the engagement. In less than 15 minutes of aerial combat, Maya had single-handedly destroyed 4 enemy aircraft while saving the lives of her fellow pilots. "Storm, that was incredible shooting," Murphy's voice came through clearly. "Outstanding work up there." But Maya was already focused on the next priority: fuel management and safe recovery to base. Her fuel gauge showed critically low levels after the extended combat, and she needed to find a tanker aircraft quickly to avoid an emergency landing in hostile territory. Magic Eye, Storm Lead. Request immediate tanker support. Fuel critical. Storm Lead, Magic Eye. Tanker support inbound, bearing 250 miles. Proceed to refueling track immediately. As Maya turned toward the tanker rendezvous, she caught sight of her reflection in the cockpit mirror. Her face was streaked with sweat, her flight suit soaked with perspiration from the high-G maneuvering, but her eyes held the calm satisfaction of a job well done. She'd faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, not through luck or accident, but through superior training, tactical thinking, and flying skills that had been tested under the most demanding circumstances possible. The woman who'd been told she didn't belong in a fighter cockpit had just proven that excellence transcended any artificial limitations. Below her, European cities glowed peacefully in the gathering darkness, their inhabitants unaware that their security had just been protected by a pilot who'd overcome systematic discrimination to become exactly what her father had envisioned: a warrior capable of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The tanker appeared ahead of her aircraft, its fuel boom extended and ready to give Maya the gas she needed to return home safely. But as she approached for refueling, Maya knew that this mission had changed everything. She was no longer fighting for acceptance or proving her worth to skeptical instructors. She was a combat-proven fighter pilot whose skills had been validated. In the ultimate arena, the war for recognition was over. The mission to protect freedom was just beginning. The landing at Ramstein Air Base felt surreal after the intensity of aerial combat. Maya's F-16 touched down on the runway with mechanical precision, but as she taxied toward the parking area, she could see ground crews and pilots gathering to witness her return. Word of her performance had already spread throughout the base. 4 confirmed kills in a single engagement. It was a feat that hadn't been accomplished by an American pilot since the Gulf War, and certainly never by a woman in aerial combat. As Maya shut down her engines and opened her canopy, the magnitude of what she'd achieved began to settle in. Tech Sergeant Walsh was the first to reach her aircraft, her face beaming with pride and excitement. "Captain, that was the most incredible flying I've ever witnessed on radarscope. 4 bandits? 4? Maya climbed down from the cockpit, her legs unsteady after 15 minutes of high-G maneuvering and the adrenaline crash that followed combat. Around her, pilots and ground crew applauded, not the polite ceremony clapping she'd experienced at Shaw, but the genuine recognition from warriors who understood what they'd witnessed. "Storm, that gun's kill on the last bandit was poetry in motion," Rodriguez called out as he approached with the rest of Viper flight. "I've never seen anything like that sequence. You saved all our lives up there." Murphy was grinning ear to ear as he shook Maya's hand. "When I saw you turn into that Su-27's attack, I thought you'd lost your mind." Then you pulled that impossible shot, and I realized I was watching a masterclass in aerial combat. Even Anderson, whose early struggles had nearly cost Maya her training slot at Shaw, looked at her with genuine awe. I wouldn't be here if you hadn't covered my six during that first engagement. That MiG-29 had me dead to rights. But the most meaningful moment came when Colonel Kane arrived at the flight line, her expression serious despite the celebratory atmosphere around Maya's aircraft. "Captain Blackwood, I need to speak with you privately." Maya followed Kane to a quiet area near the hangar, wondering if she'd somehow violated rules of engagement or exceeded her authority during the combat. The colonel's expression was unreadable. As she turned to face Maya directly, "Captain, I just finished briefing the Pentagon on your performance today. 4 confirmed kills, 3 pilots saved, and successful defense of NATO airspace against a coordinated Russian probe." Kane paused, then smiled. "They're calling it the most significant air-to-air engagement since the Cold War." Maya felt a surge of pride mixed with relief. "Thank you, ma'am. The entire flight performed exceptionally." "Yes, they did. But you, Captain, demonstrated flying skills that are being analyzed by tacticians at the highest levels of command. Your unconventional maneuvers and aggressive tactics are going to be studied in fighter pilot training for years to come." Kane's expression grew more serious. "I also spoke with Colonel Cavanaugh at Shaw. He wanted me to pass along a message." Maya tensed, wondering what her former tormentor had to say about her combat performance. He said, and I quote, "Tell Captain Blackwood that she's proven every assumption I made about her was wrong. She's not just a competent fighter pilot, she's the kind of warrior this country needs leading the next generation." The words hit Maya harder than she'd expected. For months, Cavanaugh had been the symbol of everything that tried to keep her from succeeding. His acknowledgement felt like the final validation of her journey from unwelcome outsider to combat-proven aviator. "There's something else," Kane continued. "Pentagon wants to fast-track your promotion to major and assign you to lead the new integrated fighter squadron they're forming. You'd be the youngest female squadron commander in Air Force history." Maya's mind raced. Squadron command was what every fighter pilot aspired to, the opportunity to lead other aviators in combat and shape the future of air warfare. But she also understood the symbolic weight of the assignment. "Ma'am, I'm honored by the consideration, but I want to make sure I'm being chosen for my capabilities, not as a political statement." Kane's smile was knowing. "Captain, after today's performance, no one will ever question whether you were chosen for your capabilities. You've earned this through merit, plain and simple." The formal ceremony took place 3 days later in the base auditorium, with representatives from NATO command, Pentagon leadership, and media covering the unprecedented recognition of Maya's combat achievements. The Distinguished Flying Cross was presented by a 4-star general who'd flown combat missions over Vietnam. "Captain Blackwood's actions represent the highest traditions of American air power," the general announced to the assembled crowd. Her tactical brilliance and exceptional flying skills not only protected Allied airspace, but demonstrated that excellence in combat has no gender limitations. Maya stood at attention as the medal was pinned above her left breast pocket, but her thoughts drifted to her father's final flight log entry. He'd written about being afraid of letting down people who counted on him. Today, Maya knew she'd honored his memory by protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. After the ceremony, Maya found herself surrounded by young female airmen and pilots who'd traveled from bases across Europe to witness the recognition. Their faces showed the same excitement and possibility that Maya had felt years ago when she'd first dreamed of flying fighters. "Captain," one young lieutenant asked, "what advice would you give to women who want to follow in your footsteps?" Maya thought carefully before answering. "Don't ask for permission to be exceptional. The cockpit doesn't care about your gender. It only cares about your skills, your judgment, and your courage. Train harder than anyone expects, fly better than anyone believes possible, and never let someone else's limitations become your own. That evening, alone in her quarters, Maya video called Tech Sergeant Walsh's 8-year-old daughter back in the States. The little girl's face lit up when she saw Maya wearing her new medal. "Are you really the lady who shot down 3 bad guys?" the child asked with wide-eyed wonder. "4, actually," Maya replied with a smile. "But the important thing is that we protected a lot of good people who were counting on us. When I grow up, I want to fly fighters just like you." Maya felt tears forming in her eyes. "Then start studying hard, stay physically fit, and never let anyone tell you that your dreams are too big. The sky belongs to everyone brave enough to claim it." After ending the call, Maya looked out her window at the F-16s parked on the flight line, their gray forms barely visible in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, and new opportunities to lead the next generation of fighter pilots. She'd proven that women could excel in aerial combat under the most demanding conditions possible. But more importantly, she'd opened doors that could never be closed again. Across military bases around the world, young women were looking at Maya's example and understanding that they too could reach for the sky. The little girl who'd been told she didn't belong in a fighter cockpit had become the woman who'd proven that courage, skill, and determination recognized no boundaries. Maya Blackwood had not just won her war for acceptance, she'd changed the battlefield for everyone who would follow. 6 months after her historic combat mission, Major Maya Storm Blackwood stood on the flight line at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, watching the newest class of weapons school students conduct their initial training flights. The desert sun was just as unforgiving as it had been at Shaw, but everything else had changed dramatically. Of the 12 pilots in the current class, 4 were women, a number that would have been unthinkable just a year earlier. Maya watched them with professional pride as they executed complex tactical maneuvers with the precision and confidence that had become the hallmark of the new integrated fighter program. "Major, the new pilots are looking exceptional," commented Captain Sarah Chun, Maya's deputy commander and the first Asian American woman to graduate from the weapons school. "Lieutenant Davis just pulled off that inverted climbing spiral you made famous. Nearly perfect execution." Maya smiled as she watched Lieutenant Jennifer Davis, Tech Sergeant Walsh's daughter, now grown and following her childhood dream complete the challenging maneuver that had once left veteran pilots speechless. The young woman's technique was flawless, a testament to both natural ability and the comprehensive training program Maya had helped develop. "She's got good instincts," Maya replied. "Reminds me of someone I used to know who refused to accept limitations." The transformation in military aviation had been swift and comprehensive following Maya's combat success. The Pentagon had fast-tracked integration policies, opened advanced training programs to qualified women regardless of previous restrictions, and established Maya's squadron as the template for future fighter operations. Maya's 77th Fighter Squadron, nicknamed the Stormhawks, had become the most sought-after assignment in the Air Force. Pilots competed aggressively for positions in a unit led by the woman who'd proven that tactical innovation and exceptional flying could overcome any odds. Major Blackwood came, a familiar voice behind her. Maya turned to see Colonel Brett Kavanaugh approaching, his expression warm with genuine respect. He'd requested transfer to Nellis specifically to work under Maya's command, a remarkable reversal that had surprised everyone except Maya herself. "Colonel," Maya replied with professional courtesy. Despite their complicated history, Kavanaugh had proven himself to be a valuable instructor who'd learned from his previous mistakes. "The new class is progressing ahead of schedule," Kavanaugh reported. "Combat simulation scores are exceptional, and their tactical knowledge assessments are the highest we've recorded. The integrated training model you developed is producing results that exceed all previous benchmarks." Maya nodded with satisfaction. The program she designed emphasized merit-based selection, comprehensive tactical training, and aggressive mentorship regardless of gender or background. Students succeeded or failed based solely on their performance, exactly as Maya had always believed it should be. "What's the latest on Operation Guardian Shield?" Maya asked, referring to the expanded NATO air defense mission that had grown from the success of her original combat engagement. "Deployment scheduled for next month," Kavanaugh replied. "Pentagon specifically requested the Storm Hawks to lead the integrated squadron concept in European theater. Your reputation for tactical innovation has made this unit the model for future combat operations." Maya felt a surge of pride mixed with the weight of responsibility. Leading combat operations was the ultimate validation of her journey from unwelcome outsider to respected commander, but it also meant continuing to prove that integrated units could outperform traditional squadrons. "Any word on pilot assignments for the deployment?" Maya asked. "Your full complement, plus 6 additional aircraft from other squadrons. Command wants maximum firepower under your tactical leadership." Kavanaugh paused, then added, "There's also a documentary crew that wants to follow the deployment." Pentagon approved it as part of the new recruitment initiative. Maya considered the implications. Media attention brought both opportunities and pressures, but it also meant her squadron's performance would inspire the next generation of aviators. The visibility could help normalize integrated combat units and encourage more women to pursue fighter pilot careers. "We'll accommodate the documentary team," Maya decided, "but mission requirements come first." They observe without interfering. Later that afternoon, Maya received a video call from her old friend Murphy, now commanding his own squadron at Langley Air Force Base. His face appeared on her office monitor with the background noise of flight operations behind him. "Storm, congratulations on the promotion and the new deployment assignment. Pentagon's calling your squadron the future of fighter aviation." "Thanks, Ghost. How are things at Langley?" "Busy. We've got 3 female pilots in the squadron now, all citing your example as inspiration. One of them, Lieutenant Rodriguez, no relation to Thunder, just scored the highest gunnery marks in squadron history." Murphy's expression grew more serious. "I wanted to thank you for what you've accomplished. Not just the combat success, but changing how we think about what's possible." Maya appreciated the sentiment, but she'd learned to focus on future challenges rather than past accomplishments. What's possible is what it's always been, excellence recognizing no artificial boundaries. "We just proved it where everyone could see." After ending the call, Maya walked to her office window overlooking the flight line where F-16s and F-35s sat ready for the next day's training missions. In the distance, she could see the newest class of pilots conducting post-flight debriefings, their animated discussions indicating the enthusiasm that came with mastering complex tactical scenarios. Maya's desk held a letter from the Pentagon, informing her that applications for fighter pilot training had increased 300% among qualified women following media coverage of her combat achievements. Air Force Academy enrollment showed similar increases, with many applicants specifically citing Maya's example as motivation for military service. But the most meaningful recognition sat in a simple frame next to her computer, a hand-drawn picture from Tech Sergeant Walsh's youngest daughter, showing a female pilot in an F-16 with the words, "Thank you for showing me I can be anything," written in crayon below. Maya picked up the drawing and studied the child's artwork. The pilot in the picture wore a helmet and flight suit, just like Maya's, but the face underneath belonged to a little girl who now knew that her dreams had no ceiling. Tomorrow would bring new training missions, continued preparation for deployment, and the ongoing responsibility of proving that integrated squadrons could outperform any traditional unit. Maya's personal war for acceptance was over, but her mission to expand opportunities for future aviators was just reaching full momentum. The woman who'd been told she didn't belong in a fighter cockpit was now training the next generation of Pilots who would never have to hear those words. The sky that had once seemed closed to half the population was now open to anyone with the courage and skill to claim it. Maya Blackwood had not just broken barriers, she'd made them irrelevant. 2 years later, Major Maya Blackwood stood before the Air Force Academy's graduating class as their commencement speaker. The auditorium was filled with 1,000 cadets preparing to begin their military careers, including 347 women, the highest percentage in Academy history. Maya looked out at the sea of young faces, seeing in them the same determination and possibility she'd felt decades earlier when she'd first dreamed of flying fighters. But these cadets would enter a military fundamentally changed by the barriers that had been shattered and the assumptions that had been proven wrong. 15 years ago, Maya began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. I was told that women couldn't handle the physical demands of fighter aviation, that we lacked the aggressive instinct necessary for aerial combat, that our presence would disrupt unit cohesion and endanger mission success. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Those people weren't necessarily evil or malicious. They were simply trapped by assumptions that had never been properly tested. They confused tradition with truth, preference with capability, and fear with fact. Maya paused, letting the words sink in. But assumptions, no matter how strongly held or widely believed, cannot withstand the force of demonstrated excellence. On October 15, 2025, over the skies of Eastern Europe, those assumptions died permanently. She clicked her remote, and the screen behind her displayed a tactical diagram of her historic engagement. 4 enemy aircraft destroyed, 3 squadron mates saved, NATO airspace successfully defended. This diagram represents more than a successful combat mission. It represents the moment when the conversation changed from whether women could excel in aerial combat to how quickly we could expand opportunities for all qualified aviators. In the front row, Maya could see Air Force Chief of Staff General Patricia Hayes nodding in approval. Hayes had been promoted partly based on the success of the integrated fighter program that Maya's performance had made possible. Today, 40% of fighter pilots graduating from advanced training are women. The 77th Fighter Squadron has the highest combat readiness rating in the Air Force. Integrated units consistently outperform traditional squadrons in tactical exercises and real-world operations. Maya's eyes found a familiar face in the audience, Lieutenant Jennifer Davis, now a seasoned combat pilot herself, sitting with other Academy instructors. The young woman who'd grown up inspired by Maya's example had become an instructor herself, training the next generation of aviators. But the most important lesson from this journey isn't about gender or politics or breaking barriers. It's about the danger of accepting artificial limitations on human potential. Every time we say someone can't achieve something based on circumstances beyond their control, we rob ourselves of their possible contributions. Maya clicked to the next slide, showing a formation of F-35 Lightning E's with mixed crews preparing for deployment. These aircraft represent the future of American air power. They're flown by the best pilots we can train, selected purely on merit and capability. Some happen to be men, some happen to be women, but all of them are warriors committed to protecting the freedoms we hold dear. The applause that erupted was thunderous, but Maya raised her hand for quiet. Your generation will face threats we can't imagine using technologies we're just beginning to develop. The challenges ahead will require every ounce of talent, courage, and innovation we can muster. We cannot afford to waste a single qualified person because they don't fit someone's outdated expectations. Maya's voice grew stronger as she reached her conclusion. When you graduate today and begin your service to this nation, remember that excellence recognizes no boundaries. Your value as an officer will be measured by your competence, your character, and your commitment to mission success. Everything else is just noise. She paused one final time, looking across the auditorium filled with future leaders. Fly hard, lead well, and never let anyone else's limitations become your own. The sky belongs to everyone brave enough to claim it. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes, with cadets, faculty, and distinguished guests recognizing not just Maya's words, but the transformation she represented. As she left the podium, Maya felt the weight of responsibility that came with being a symbol, but also the satisfaction of knowing that future aviators would face fewer barriers than she had. After the ceremony, Maya was approached by a young cadet whose flight suit bore the distinctive patch of the Academy's aeronautics program. "Major Blackwood," the cadet said, "I'm Sarah Kim, graduating tomorrow as a pilot trainee. I wanted to thank you for showing me what's possible." Maya looked at the young woman, confident, capable, and ready to begin a career that would have been unthinkable for previous generations. "Cadet Kim, where are you headed for training?" "A 35 program at Luke Air Force Base, ma'am. My dream assignment is the 77th Fighter Squadron, the Storm Hawks." Maya smiled. "Work hard, fly well, and maybe we'll have that conversation in a few years. The Storm Hawks are always looking for exceptional pilots." That evening, alone in her hotel room, Maya opened her father's flight log one final time. His final entry still resonated with purpose and clarity. "Heading into combat tomorrow. Not afraid of dying, afraid of letting down the people counting on me." Maya picked up a pen and added her own entry below his words. "Mission accomplished. Dad, the people counting on us are safe, and the doors are open for everyone who dreams of following. Your little girl became the warrior you always knew she could be." She closed the log and looked out her window at the lights of Colorado Springs, where tomorrow's military leaders were preparing for careers that would define America's future security. Some of those leaders would be women who'd never been told they didn't belong, who'd never had to fight for basic acceptance, who'd grown up knowing that excellence was the only qualification that mattered. Maya Blackwood had started her journey, fighting for the right to serve. She was ending it having ensured that future generations would never have to fight that same battle. The barriers were gone. The sky was open. The mission continued. And in bases around the world, young pilots were climbing into cockpits, preparing to defend freedom with the understanding that their value would be measured not by who they were, but by what they could accomplish when the stakes were highest and the mission mattered most. The woman who'd been told she couldn't fly fighters had proven that, with enough courage, skill, and determination, anyone could soar beyond the limitations others tried to impose. Maya's legacy wasn't just her own success, it was the success of everyone who would follow, flying free in skies that now belonged to all who had the courage to claim them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.